Dear friends, we are writing from the Shinjek country, from the Arctic wilderness of the Brooks Range, 150 miles north of Fort Yukon and the Arctic Circle, more than 2,000 miles north of Seattle.
Olaus Murie was a seasoned Arctic explorer. His favorite Arctic expedition, and his most influential, was the Murie expedition to the Brooks Range. Financed by the New York Zoological Society and the Conservation Foundation, the Muries set out in the summer of 1956 to explore this largely unknown area of northeastern Alaska. Their hope was to have the area preserved as wilderness. The film, Letter from the Brooks Range, was part of their expedition report.
Mrs. Murie and I go afield together to climb mountains, to see what's on the other side, or to visit interesting parts of the valley. Often, weary with the day afield, we were glad to get back to camp. Cooking and camp chores had to be done, such as washing clothes in the lake. Mrs. Murie took charge of the cooking. One gets a glimpse of the beautiful country we are in at all times.
Wherever we went, we had the ptarmigan. The males, striking in appearance, were conspicuous in the landscape, but the female is more inconspicuous and silent. Sitting on the nest, incubating the eggs, the female ptarmigan blends well with her background. Here we found a recently hatched ptarmigan held in the hand for its picture before returning it to the mother, who was anxiously and bravely fluttering near us.
One of the big events of the summer was the caribou migration. One evening the animals began crossing the flats near our camp. There they came, some down the Shinjek Valley, some from over on the pass to the Schaller River. They assembled here, traveling over the open tundra and among the scattered trees, up over the mountain pass back of our camp. I estimated 1,500 in the herd passing by on that one evening. The caribou story is a long one, which cannot be told here. But if ever we are to preserve this species on the North American continent, it must be done in places like this. More than any other animal, the caribou of the Northland needs space and freedom of movement. Food supply is a crucial element.
This, then, is the Shinjek country, the Arctic wilderness of the Brooks Range, the land of the North that offers us beauty of landscape, the charm of plant growth, birds and mammals that have found this a good place in which to live. Will we have the wisdom to cherish such places, to leave such parts of the earth in their natural state, to visit them humbly and with appreciation?
Our decisions are a measure of our growth. Sincerely, Olaus Murie.
Sincerely, Mardy Murie.
Three young biologists went with the Muries on the Shinjek expedition: ornithologist Bryna Kessel, field biologist Bob Creer, and graduate student George Schaller, whose later work would be deeply influenced by his experience in the Shinjek.
I was a student at the University of Alaska, and I heard that Olaus Murie, who I knew as a naturalist who'd studied caribou in Alaska back in 1920s, and who studied elk later and so forth. He was a well-known mammologist. I heard he was planning to go into the Brooks Range. And so I wrote him a letter saying, I'm willing to go with you as field assistant. I don't want pay, you only have to feed me. And he wrote me a very nice letter back. Let me quote you, because I quoted it in a book. This is Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Seasons of Land and Life in Land by Subhankar Banerjee. It's a beautiful book. And Olaus replied, quote, that he would be very glad to have you with me. And then he further explained, I simply had the urge to get into that mountain country, to see what animal life is there, to photograph and to sketch and to somehow get the feel of the country. You might be glad to explore the country out from camp, to gather what information you can and gain an understanding of the ecology of the region that may be useful to you in your future work. And I finished the paragraph by saying, what aspiring naturalist could resist such an invitation in the quiet passion, enthusiasm, and spirit of adventure of the person extending it? And I think his few sentences very well symbolized what Olaus stood for, and that he was a superb naturalist. He was very perceptive, but he had the perspective of a humanist, that he was not just interested in the science, but he was interested in what he called the precious intangible values of wilderness. And as a student just beginning a career, this combination had a tremendous impact on me, because I was not interested in just studying animals for the animals' sake, although the curiosity was there. I wanted something beyond that. And Olaus helped to open up a whole new world, that you have an obligation, a responsibility to help preserve that what you study. And this is what the trip together taught me.
Olaus Murie was born in 1889 in Moorhead, Minnesota, the oldest son of newly arrived Norwegian immigrants Joachim and Marie Murie. When Olaus was a teenager, his mother became a widow with 3 boys to raise, and Olaus took his brothers under his wing. He finished high school and won a scholarship to college. In 1912, he graduated as a biologist and immediately went into the Canadian Arctic on a 3-year assignment. After a World War I stint in the Army Balloon Corps, Olaus joined the U.S. Biological Survey. His first assignment was to assist the eminent biologist E.W. Nelson on a study of the Alaska caribou. In 1922, Olaus and his brother Adolf made their famous winter trip with 2 dog teams into Arctic Alaska. By then, Olaus had traveled widely in the far north, and he could speak the native Eskimo language. While Olaus was in Fairbanks between trips, he met Margaret Mardy Thomas. In 1924, Mardy became the first woman to graduate from the University of Alaska. Shortly after her graduation, Mardy and Olaus married. Their honeymoon was a 550-mile dog team expedition into the Arctic winter of northern Alaska. In the summer of 1926, Olaus and Mardy set out on another unusual expedition, this time with their 1-year-old son. With fellow explorer Jess Rust, they poled and pulled their boat 250 miles up the mosquito-infested Old Crow River in search of what proved to be non-existent flocks of geese. With a small son and a new baby girl, Mardy joined Olaus in Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 1927. As one of the Biological Survey's top scientists, Olaus had been sent there to investigate an epidemic die-off in the state's elk herds. By the time he solved the elk problem, the Muries had 3 children, and Olaus's mother, who was living with them, to take on his field trips. In 1909, President Theodore Roosevelt donated 20 American elk to the government of New Zealand. 40 years later, Olaus was invited to New Zealand to see how the elk herd was doing in one of the wettest places on earth. Olaus and Mardy, along with Adolph and Louise Murie, were now making their home on 77 acres of wilderness in Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming. The Murie Ranch became a mecca for conservation. Olaus was president of the Wilderness Society, and leading conservationists joined the Muries in deep policy discussions about preserving wilderness. For the Muries, the high point of this era was their Shinjek expedition. They considered this expedition the best time of their lives. The scenery, companionship, and scientific discovery enchanted them and stirred their efforts to preserve this place as a national treasure.
The expedition was wonderful. We had Bryna Kessel, an ornithologist. We had Bob Creer, who was basically a cameraman for the expedition. We had myself, who did a little bit of everything. And then, of course, you had Olaus and Mardy, who drew everybody together. And it was a very companionable expedition. There were no disagreements. People did their own thing during the day. I would go off and watch birds with Bryna. Olaus and Mardy might go off. Sometimes we'd switch and go off with different people. In the evening, we come together in camp and we sit and share experiences. Who saw a red fox? Who saw moose tracks? Who saw a bear scat or whatever? And the really wonderful thing was Olaus, in his quiet way, led the expedition. He didn't say, do this, do that. But by example, he made everybody work hard and with pleasure, because he was in his late 60s then, and yet he retained his capacity for wonder, his curiosity in environment. He was always observing with binoculars, taking a picture of a flower, sketching something like a caribou antler. He was always aware of his surroundings. So in a way, he became the spirit of the place, and I think we all responded to that. And I was very impressed because here at his age, we'd be walking along and he'd see bear scat. Now, most biologists would carefully pick it apart, maybe see what is eaten. Olaus would scoop it up in his hand and look at it and be ecstatic over the remnants of this or that in the bear scat and note down what the bear had eaten. And to retain this kind of enthusiasm for nature at that age is something that impressed me tremendously. And our conversations constantly veered back and forth between, I saw this bird, and isn't this beautiful? We must save this area so other people can enjoy it. And so he, in effect, whether or not, everybody looks for a mentor. And to see Olaus and Mardy working together, they became mentors. They almost subconsciously told me, oh, this is the way I want to spend my life, to do some good science and something good for society, to help protect an area for future generations. And so the trip had a long-lasting impact on me. Well, it's been half a century now.
Olaus lived to see the Shinjek preserved, but the Murie Shinjek expedition was to be their last. Soon after their return home, Olaus was diagnosed with cancer. Between bouts of surgery, he lobbied with his remaining strength for the Wilderness Act, but he died before its enactment. When President Johnson signed the Wilderness Act in 1964, Mardy was there. Determined to carry on Olaus's work, she persevered, and she succeeded. She received every major conservation award. In 1998, at the age of 95, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her steadfast and inspiring efforts to safeguard America's wilderness for future generations. The summer of 2006 marked the 50th anniversary of the Murie Shinjek expedition. To celebrate this event, the Murie Center organized a return expedition to the Shinjek in collaboration with the National Geographic Society and National Public Radio. George Schaller led this expedition. It was his first return to the Shinjek in 50 years. To his delight, this fondly remembered place was still intact. Like the Muries, he brought with him 3 young biologists. Together, they walked the terrain walked by the Muries and toasted the event with 50-year-old wine. Graduate student Forrest McCarthy helped plan this memorable event.
It started when I had a conversation with the director of the Murie Center here, several years ago, way after a conversation with George Schaller regarding the idea of having a 50th anniversary return to the Shinjek. And George Schaller hadn't been back there since he was there with the Muries in '56. Having been involved with the Murie Center over 8 years or so now, and knowing the Murie legacy and George Schaller, I just couldn't think of a greater honor and what a neat experience that would be. There's always the message of speaking out for the refuge and conservation both in Alaska and worldwide. I think Olaus had inspired him and had mentored him and really defined, what his life would be. And I really truly believe that he wanted to somehow go full circle and return that. I believe he succeeded. I was really inspired. It was really a privilege to see that kind of traditional naturalist and be out walking in a place like that and experience how tuned in and how observant they really are, and how George is, and something to really aspire to. One evening when we were at our takeout of the Canning River right on the coast by the Beaufort Sea, he said, Forrest, you want to go out for a walk with me this evening? And we did, and it was just a beautiful evening, twilight, and the Brooks Range just glowing pink, and enough wind to blow away the mosquitoes. And I had just prepared for a little walk. I grabbed my camera, and off we went. And probably 6 hours and maybe 15 miles later we returned, and in the meantime, we had walked all over the coastal plain and examined caribou and scat and grizzly scat, and saw all kinds of birds and found their nests, and realizing here I was on the coastal plain in the caribou calving grounds in 1002 with George Schaller, who was on the 56th expedition, which was pivotal in protecting this place, and this is pretty unique and incredible opportunity.
In Grand Teton National Park, on the old dude ranch that became the Muries' home in 1945, the Murie Center now continues the Muries' work. People come here to do research, to hold meetings about preserving wilderness, to feel the beauty and atmosphere of the Murie Ranch, which has been designated a National Historic Landmark. Like Murie Center Director Brooke Williams, they are inspired by the legacy of the Muries.
It's uncanny and it's weird to talk about, but I feel some kind of inspiration from Olaus. And it makes me wonder what he would be doing if he was in his prime today, based on a whole series of changing conditions. Life is a lot different now, and in fact, I really feel that wilderness is more important now than maybe it was then. When you think about population, when you think about how cities are growing, when you think about young people growing up without access to wild places like we all had growing up. So I just feel that we have a real responsibility here and a real opportunity to take this legacy, which I really feel is a huge foundation to a platform really to step from, and to really wonder what they would be doing and what effective methods really need to be developed and then tested, and try to preserve more wild places and more wildlife, just like they were doing. So like I said, it's pretty weird to talk about, but I do feel kind of some inspiration from them, especially Olaus.